In the quiet, grey streets of Scotswood, a small working-class neighbourhood in Newcastle, England, the sound of laughter once echoed from every alleyway. Children played tag, skipping over puddles and kicking pebbles down the cobblestone road. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. But behind one cracked brick wall, behind one broken window, lived a girl whose laughter was hollow, and whose eyes saw the world very differently. Her name was Mary Flora Bell. Born on May 26, 1957, Mary entered the world surrounded by darkness. Her mother, Betty Bell, was a 17-year-old sex worker who never wanted her child. Neighbors whispered that Betty had even tried to end the pregnancy several times, and when Mary survived, people called it a miracle. But what kind of miracle grows up without love? From the very beginning, Mary's life was marked by rejection, violence, and pain. Betty was cruel, unpredictable, and often gone for days. When she was home, she didn't act like a mother. She acted like a stranger who resented the child she had brought into the world. Neighbors said they often heard shouting, sometimes cries. A few even claimed they saw bruises on the little girl's arms, neck, and back. And when Mary spoke, her tone was cold, too cold for a child. At just 5 years old, she had already begun showing disturbing signs. When other kids fell and scraped their knees, she didn't help them up, she laughed. When someone's pet died, she didn't express sadness, she asked, "Did it bleed?" It wasn't curiosity. It was fascination. By the time she was 10, the darkness inside Mary had begun to take form. Teachers described her as intelligent, but manipulative, capable of charm when it suited her, but quick to anger if anyone challenged her. Her best friend, or rather her accomplice, was Norma Bell, no relation, a 13-year-old girl from the same neighborhood. Unlike Mary, Norma was naive, simple, easily led. Mary saw that, and she used it. The two girls would roam the streets together, sometimes playing harmless games, but often those games turned strange, dangerous even. They'd twist the arms of younger children, shove them, choke them lightly, then laugh and say, "We were only playing." The neighborhood adults thought they were just rough kids. But they had no idea how far things were about to go. It started with small acts of cruelty. On May 11, 1968, a group of boys found a toddler covered in bruises behind an old air raid shelter. When questioned, the child couldn't explain what happened. But witnesses saw Mary and Norma nearby just moments before. A few days later, a mother found her little girl playing with pills scattered on the floor. She said a girl named Mary had given them to her, saying, "They'll make you feel funny." When the mother confronted Mary, the child only smirked and said, "I was just joking." No one reported it. No one imagined an 11-year-old could mean harm. But then came May 25, 1968, the day before Mary's 11th birthday. That morning, a little boy named Martin Brown, just 4 years old, told his mother he was going out to play. He never came back. Hours later, his lifeless body was discovered inside an abandoned house on St. Margaret's Road. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry, and no clear cause of death. The only clue was a bottle of painkillers nearby. Police initially thought it was an accident. Maybe Martin had swallowed the pills. But the autopsy showed otherwise. There were no drugs in his system. Instead, the boy had been suffocated. The town was shaken. A killer was out there, and no one suspected it was a child. At Martin's funeral, something chilling happened. Among the crowd of grieving parents and neighbors stood Mary. Dressed in her neat little coat, she smiled faintly as she watched the coffin being lowered into the ground. One woman recalled seeing her giggle and whisper something to Norma. Later that day, Mary walked up to Martin's house and knocked on the door. When his mother answered, Mary asked in a soft, almost sweet voice, "Is Martin coming out to play?" The mother slammed the door in shock. Mary simply laughed and skipped away. 2 months later, another horror struck Scotswood. On July 31, 1968, a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe disappeared after playing outside. His family searched frantically, and neighbors joined in, combing the streets and alleys until nightfall. Then, someone found him, lying lifeless in a patch of dirt near a construction site. This time the scene was far more disturbing. Brian's body had been mutilated. There were small puncture marks on his skin, and his hair had been cut. The letter M had been scratched into his stomach with a razor blade or a pair of scissors. Near his body, someone had scattered clumps of grass as if trying to bury him. The police knew now, this was no accident. This was murder. And whoever did it was taunting them. Detectives from Newcastle's police department descended on Scotswood. They interviewed dozens of children, searching for any clue, any rumor. Among those questioned was Mary Bell. Unlike the other children, she seemed completely at ease. She smiled during questioning, fidgeted, and even asked the detective, "Do you think they'll find who did it?" Her answers were odd, almost rehearsed. She said she saw an 8-year-old boy with Brian that day, and that the boy was carrying scissors, a strange and unnecessary detail. Then, when the detective pressed her again, she changed her story. "I saw him playing by himself," she said. "Maybe someone took him." Her inconsistency made her stand out, but it was what came next that sealed her fate. A few days later, police interviewed Norma Bell. Unlike Mary, Norma was visibly shaken, nervous, on the verge of tears. Under pressure, she finally confessed. She told detectives that Mary had done it. That Mary had led Brian to the wasteland, strangled him with her bare hands, and then carved the letter "M" into his skin. Norma said she tried to stop her, but Mary laughed and said, "I like hurting things. It makes me feel strong." Norma's testimony was enough for police to bring both girls in. When confronted, Mary didn't deny it right away. Instead, she smirked and said, "You can't prove it." But when the detective mentioned Brian's hair being cut, her face went pale. That detail had never been made public. She knew because she was there. The people of Scotswood were horrified when the news broke. The murderer wasn't a man, not a teenager, not even an older child. It was an 11-year-old girl. The press called her the child killer, the little murderess, and evil in a dress. But psychologists wanted to know why. What could drive a child so young to kill? When asked if she felt sorry, Mary simply said, "I don't feel sad. I like to see when they go still. It's peaceful." Her eyes were calm. Her voice, flat, emotionless. Even hardened detectives felt a chill when they looked at her. Mary Bell was charged with manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Experts testified that she suffered from severe emotional disturbance and a lack of empathy caused by years of abuse and neglect. Her mother, Betty, reportedly continued working as a prostitute even after Mary's arrest, and rumors spread that she had allowed men to use her daughter for money. The jury found Mary guilty of manslaughter in December 1968. She was only 11 years old when sentenced to indefinite detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, meaning she would be held until the government decided she was no longer a danger. As she was led out of court, reporters shouted her name. She turned once, smiled, and said quietly, "You'll remember me." And they did. Even decades later, Mary Bell remains one of the most chilling cases in British criminal history, not because of the brutality of her crimes, but because of her age and her calmness. She wasn't a monster hiding in the dark. She was a child walking in daylight. A child who had seen too much. A child who had become the thing she feared most. The courtroom had gone silent. When the words "guilty of manslaughter" echoed through the air, the entire country seemed to stop breathing. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, and in the middle of it all sat Mary Bell, calm, expressionless, her blue eyes unflinching as if she didn't fully grasp the gravity of what she had done. She was only 11 years old, too young for prison, too dangerous for freedom. So the judge declared she would be held, at Her Majesty's pleasure. An open-ended sentence that meant she'd stay locked away until the authorities believed she was no longer a threat. But everyone wondered, could a child who had already killed ever truly change? The walls of Red Bank. Mary was sent to Red Bank Secure Unit, a detention center in St. Helens, England. It wasn't a typical prison. It was designed for young offenders, a mix between a reform school and a psychiatric institution. But Red Bank had seen nothing like Mary Bell before. Most of the girls there were thieves, truants, or runaways. Mary was different. She had taken 2 innocent lives and she had done it without remorse. From her first day she stood out. Her posture, confident. Her voice, controlled. Her smile, unnerving. Staff members noted that she didn't cry, didn't panic, didn't ask for her mother. Instead, she observed everyone and everything, like she was studying them. Psychologists began working with her immediately. They wanted to understand the mind of a child killer. Some called her a psychopath. Others thought she was a victim of horrific abuse, acting out of confusion and pain. One psychiatrist wrote in his notes, "Mary is intelligent, articulate, and disturbingly self-aware. She understands her crimes but does not feel them." The girl behind the mask. Behind closed doors, Mary began to talk. Not in tears but in stories. She told her therapists about her mother, about how Betty would disappear for days, leaving her alone, hungry, cold. She said men would visit their home and sometimes her mother would make her entertain them. There was physical abuse too, slaps, beatings, choking. At times, Betty even threatened to kill her. One chilling story stuck with her doctor. Mary claimed that once her mother had tried to suffocate her with a pillow, the same method Mary later used on her victims. It was as if pain had been passed down like a family heirloom. A cycle of violence that began long before Mary ever met Martin Brown or Brian Howe. Psychologists began to believe that Mary had never learned what empathy was. To her, pain and control were love, twisted and confused by years of trauma. But knowing why she did it didn't make the reality any less horrifying. Growing up in the shadows. The years passed inside Red Bank and Mary grew from a child into a teenager, then a young woman. She was quiet, disciplined, and intelligent. She read constantly, psychology, poetry, philosophy. She studied people like puzzles. One of her counselors said she could mirror anyone's emotions, pretending to be kind, gentle, or remorseful when it benefited her. But behind that mask, the same emptiness remained. Other inmates described her as manipulative, sometimes cruel, sometimes charming. One girl said, "Mary could make you feel like her best friend one minute and make you afraid of her the next." There were rumors she bragged about her crimes. Others claimed she'd cry in her sleep, whispering the names Martin and Brian. No one knew which version of Mary was real, or if she even knew herself. A new name, a new beginning. In 1973, after 5 years at Red Bank, Mary was transferred to another facility, a more open prison for young women. By then she had turned 16. She had grown tall, soft-spoken, and polite. Staff reported that she was a model inmate. But beneath the surface, the country still feared her. Newspapers followed every move she made. Headlines screamed, "Child killer turns sweet 16." Then, in 1980, something shocking happened. After serving 12 years, Mary Bell, the girl who killed at 11, was released from custody. She was just 23 years old. She walked out of prison with a new name, a new identity, and a promise from the government: complete anonymity. The world would not know who she was or where she went. For most, that would be the end of the story. But the darkness of Mary Bell's past wasn't something she could escape. The ghost of Scotswood. Even after her release, the memory of her crimes haunted the small neighborhood of Scotswood. Older residents still remembered the fear, the way parents once refused to let their children play outside. 2 small boys gone forever. 1 little girl forever marked by evil. And yet there were people who pitied her. They said she was a product of her upbringing, a broken child created by a broken world. Mary tried to live quietly under her new identity. She worked small jobs, moved often, kept to herself. But the press never stopped hunting for her. Every few years, someone would claim to have found Mary Bell. Sometimes those rumors turned violent. Strangers harassed women who resembled her, calling them murderer, monster, child killer. The government eventually granted her lifelong anonymity. Even her daughter, born in 1984, was given a secret identity to protect her from the sins of her mother's past. A mother's shadow. When news broke that Mary had become a mother, the country erupted in anger. How could someone who had taken 2 children's lives be allowed to raise one of her own? But those who knew her said something had changed. For the first time she seemed afraid, not of the law, not of punishment, but of herself. She told a journalist once, years later, that motherhood forced her to see the world differently. She said, "When I look at my child, I see innocence, the same innocence I destroyed. It never leaves me." Still, she lived in hiding. She moved homes constantly, always fearing discovery. Paparazzi once cornered her and her daughter, forcing them to flee again. She begged the courts for protection, saying, "My daughter should not have to pay for my past." And the court agreed, granting her a rare legal right, a lifelong anonymity order under British law, extended even to her daughter. To this day, her true name and location remain unknown. Inside the mind. Experts continue to debate her case for decades. Was Mary Bell evil, or a victim? Could a child ever be truly responsible for murder? The psychologists who worked with her believed she had a deep personality disorder, caused by severe trauma and lack of attachment. Some said she had been programmed by abuse. Others argued she knew exactly what she was doing. In later interviews, Mary described her childhood as a nightmare I was born into. She claimed she never felt normal love, only fear and confusion. But when asked about Martin Brown and Brian Howe, she always paused. Sometimes she deflected. Sometimes she went silent.